The 2022 playoffs so far have been highly entertaining with tons of great storylines. You have super teams falling, young stars emerging, unlikely contenders, and as always, high drama and great late game basketball. But quite possibly the best storyline is the resurgence of the Golden State Dynasty led by one Steph Curry. And after breezing through the Western Conference, Steph Curry's Warriors once again made the finals for the 6th time in 8 years. The first team to do that is Michael Jordan's Bulls in the 90s. So with that being the case, we're to compare Curry's Warriors to Jordan's Bulls, look at the similarities, look at the differences, and really decide who had the better overall dynasty and whose team at their peak was actually better. And looking at Golden State first, before Steph Curry got to this team, they were a poverty franchise for really the previous 20 years, as during that time period, they had a total of 2 playoff series wins and had made the finals since 1976. Now, even with that being the case, shortly after Steph Curry was drafted in 2009, the Warriors very quickly would add key pieces. As in 2011, they'd take Klay Thompson with the 11th pick, and the following year in 2012, take Draymond Green with an early 2nd round pick. That right there is the big 3 that would change the entire NBA. And the dynamic of those 3 guys to stick together is something rarely seen in the modern NBA. And of course, you guys know that big 3 was highly successful, winning 1 championship and only losing 9 games during the 2016 season. And a key part of that Warriors team that many forget is that Steph Curry at this point was only making $11 million per year due to his early career ankle injuries that made Golden State very skeptical to give him a big contract. And with that being the case for the Warriors in 2017, they would sign Kevin Durant due to Steph Curry's contract, as well as the boost in salary cap. And as you guys know, this Golden State team, they were highly hated, and they were far from a homegrown dynasty with one Kevin Durant. And whatever you think of those Warriors teams and their championships, you have to admit they were dominant and one of the best teams of all time. And after winning 2 championships and making 3 finals, KD 3 years later would leave Golden State, headed off to Brooklyn. And another key fact many fans forget, Golden State at that point didn't lose KD for nothing, as with Brooklyn they got a sign and trade, getting D'Angelo Russell in return. And ironically enough, D'Angelo Russell was a huge reason Golden State once again became a contending championship team. As with D'Lo going to Golden State once again, they had a pretty good young asset that they flipped for Andrew Wiggins, who at that point was underwhelming and his time had run out in Minnesota. And with Karl Anthony Towns and D'Angelo, they were good friends, this trade made sense for both sides. But in hindsight, Golden State absolutely fleeced the Minnesota Timberwolves. As getting Andrew Wiggins, he's a perfect 3-and-D player and the perfect replacement to someone like Kevin Durant. And as you already see when it comes to this dynasty, luck is always involved. Now looking at the 2020 Warriors, in the moment they seemed unlucky and looked like the dynasty had finally come to an end. But this 2020 season actually was a blessing in disguise, as Steph Curry only played 5 games that year, Draymond playing 43, and Klay missing the entire season. Now once again, in the moment, that was awful, and Golden State was one of the worst teams in the NBA. And the following year in 2021, once again the Warriors, with a healthy Curry, a healthy Wiggins, as well as Draymond and Poole, once again would miss the playoffs in what seemed like a disappointing season. But in reality and in hindsight, Golden State missing the playoffs that year was a blessing, as both Curry and Draymond in their early 30s didn't get the added miles and added wear of a deep playoff run. And let's be honest, that Golden State team, they were fun to watch, but they weren't winning the championship in 2021. And another big time plus for that year, guys like Jordan Poole, Andrew Wiggins, they finally established themselves as reliable and championship caliber players. In summary, everything that appeared bad in the moment, in the end would work out and benefit Golden State in the long run. And looking at their team this year in 2022, once again it's a homegrown dynasty and a homegrown championship team, which is very refreshing in 2022. Of course you have Steph, Klay, and Wiggins, who are all first round picks. You have Draymond, who's a 2nd round pick, Jordan Poole was 28th pick, Kevon Looney was the 30th pick. In addition to that, you have Kuminga, Moody, as well as James Wiseman, who are great picks and solid players when they're healthy. And doing research for this video, looking at Golden State's trades, their moves, who they signed, this is a Masterclass 101 of how to rebuild as well as retool an aging dynasty. And moving on from Golden State's dynasty, let's look at Michael Jordan's Bulls from the early 90s, specifically 91, 92, as well as 93. And the foundation for this Bulls team, of course, you had Michael Jordan, who was the 3rd pick in the '84 draft. You had Scottie Pippen, who was the 5th pick, Stacey King, who was 6th, Horace Grant, who was 10th, and B.J. Armstrong, who was 18th. That is 5 Bulls players who were drafted by the team, as well as Jerry Krause, making them once again a homegrown dynasty, just like Golden State. Also, 2 big-time pieces they had was John Paxson, who before the Bulls was not really a noteworthy player, and traded for a bag of chips from San Antonio. Also, you had Bill Cartwright, who was a huge addition, getting traded for Charles Oakley, one of Jordan's best friends. And much like Golden State pre-Kevin Durant, this team was built from the ground up, starting with Jordan, adding on Pippen, Grant, the role players, the shooters, and eventually making them into one of the best teams of all time. And as you guys know, they won 3 straight chips from 91 to 93. Now where it gets dicey and very interesting is the second three-peat, which is a retooled and rebuilt Bulls team, with their only 2 constant players being Michael Jordan as well as Scottie Pippen. And Jerry Krause, much like Bob Myers, is great at retooling as well as rebuilding and finding the players who are undervalued with the diamonds in the rough. Looking at the Bulls' second three-peat, you had Steve Kerr, who before the Bulls was averaging 3 points per game, playing Orlando on an expansion team. Then you had Ron Harper, who before the Bulls was playing on a terrible Clippers team, only won 27 games. He was signed in the 95 offseason and a big-time pickup for the second three-peat. Of course, you had Tony Kukoc, who was a second-round pick in the early 90s, who finally arrived in 1995. And then you have Dennis Rodman, who 1 year prior to being traded to the Bulls was an absolute nutcase and a big-time red flag for any NBA team. And with that being the case, Dennis Rodman was traded for Will Perdue, an average and middling NBA center. And looking at both these teams, they actually are pretty similar. Looking at their GMs like Bob Myers, Jerry Krause, we already talked about, they're very savvy, make the right moves, pick up undervalued players, late draft picks. Both those guys are outstanding and underrated pieces to the overall dynasty. And of course, the central focus and the 2 best players, that would be Steph Curry and Michael Jordan. They're the nucleus of the dynasty that make everything go, and without them, all of this would never happen. And looking at the supporting players as well as all-star cast, you have Klay Thompson, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, Jordan Poole, and of course Jordan, he had Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, he had Steve Kerr, Ron Harper, Horace Grant. Both these guys had great teammates, who at the end of the day wanted to win, and they fit together to make one of the best dynasties of all time. And looking at both these teams in their totality, there's some pretty odd and scary similarities. One thing I did see was a weird 2-year gap between championships and between dynasties. Of course, Jordan 94 as well as half 95, he was out, and Steph in 2020 missed the entire season, only playing 5 games. Both those teams' 1-year, 2-year gaps was a big-time vital piece to retool, rebuild, and kind of refresh and take a break from the pressure. Also, one big-time similarity is that one superstar in both these dynasties was underpaid as well as undervalued. For Chicago, that was Scottie Pippen, and for Golden State, that was Steph Curry. And with both those guys being underpaid, that gave the team salary cap flexibility, as well as breathing room to sign really good role players. Also, one thing I briefly touched on is both these dynasties robbing a team and stealing a 3rd star. For Golden State, that was Andrew Wiggins robbing the Timberwolves, and for the Bulls, that was Dennis Rodman absolutely fleecing the San Antonio Spurs. Now, to wrap this video up, I'll say one last thing. When looking at both these dynasties, the Bulls dynasty, of course, was greater as they won more championships. But I would argue Golden State's dynasty and the overall rebuild and retooling was actually more impressive than the Chicago Bulls. And when it comes to both these dynasties' peaks, their overall best teams, the '96 Bulls and the 2017 Warriors. And like I said numerous times, I think both these teams are the two greatest teams in NBA history. Of course, in my view, Jordan's Bulls still are the greatest team in NBA history, with the Curry and KD Warriors just slightly behind. Now, with that final point being made, that is the end of the video, and the overall summary of the Jordan Bulls versus the Curry Warriors. Looking at their rebuild, their retooling, and how similar they actually were. As always, thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time.